This is The Catholic Current with Father Robert McTeigue.
The legislature surrenders authority to the executive to set up agencies to enact policies.
Precisely because it allows legislatures off the hook. And the other problem here, Father, is these agencies can become captured by the very entities they're meant to regulate. And that is very much the case here with respect to the Food and Drug Administration, the agency that issued the emergency use authorizations pursuant to which these experimental vaccines have been released to the public.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTeigue of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment, to might hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, friends, it is Friday, and that means we have our special Friday format. We'll start with Let's Talk About This. You and I will walk through a complex issue together. And in the last segment, it's you and me with Weekend Readiness, reviewing the headlines of the week in light of the upcoming Sunday scriptures. So we'll be all prayed up for Sunday Mass. Here's what I want to talk about today: censoring the obvious. Well, what does that mean? Let me give you a couple of for instances. Representative Jim Banks, Congress representing a Republican district in Indiana, was blocked from Twitter because why? Because he referred to Health and Human Service Assistant Secretary Rachel Levine, who identifies as transgender, as a man. Well, given that sex is a content and you can do what you will, you're either male or you're female, the end, full stop, following the science. But because he said the quiet part out loud, he was banned from Twitter. There are certain things that you're just not allowed to say. And for example, we now talk about birthing persons rather than mothers. WebMD has an article about how men can become pregnant. I think it was the California Medical Association talked about people with the front hole. We don't talk about nursing mothers. We talk about people who produce chest milk. We're rearranging the language and rearranging the language and rearranging the language. Why? Because reality is getting in the way. Reality is getting in the way of people who want to use technology and social media, and worst of all, the violent power of the state, using all those principalities together to say, my will be done, to act like a 2-year-old who says, I want what I want when I want it. And so we've redefined marriage. We ignore the fact that children need a mother and a father. The Center for Disease Control is changing the definitions of vaccines on the fly. We'll link to all this in the show notes. And we're telling children that just because you have girl parts doesn't mean you're a girl. Just because you have boy parts doesn't mean you're a boy. Part of what concerns me with this maneuver is that we're prompting children to lack confidence in the obvious and the ordinary, to not trust common sense, to not trust their own senses, to not trust what had been taken for granted throughout all of human history. Why is this a good thing? Well, it's a good thing if, again, you want to impose your will upon reality. It's also a really good thing if you want to impose your will upon others. There's a name I want you to know. You can look him up. His name is Yuri Bezmenov. He's a KGB agent, an officer in the KGB, the secret police of the Soviet Union. He defected to the West, late 70s, early 80s, and he gave a series of very detailed interviews as to how propaganda works. You should watch those interviews and you should take notes and compare it to what you see today. He said this: This is Yuri Bezmenov talking about how the KGB worked, how Soviet propaganda worked. He says, as I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who is demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents and pictures, he will refuse to believe it. That's the tragedy of the situation of demoralization. I want to reflect on that for a while. It seems to me that there is a very concerted effort by effective powers and principalities, by what I call Caesar and the court gestures. Caesar, of course, represents the different forms of government, and the court gestures represent social media, the entertainment industry, and even to some degree the so-called news media, at least in terms of the mainstream. And there seems to be a coordination of the different institutions, so the state, the media, academia, certain religious groups, to rewrite reality and to undercut the foundations, to give us a kind of amnesia of what it means to be a human being, what it means to belong to a natural community like family, and what it means to belong to a slowly developing community over time, whether an ethnic group or a nation, so that we don't have a past, which means we don't have an identity in the present, which means we have neither expectations nor obligations towards the future. And that allows us to be beguiled, to be manipulated, to be misled. Look up the term gaslighting. I think that is very important as well. You need to know what that is. And if we forget our history, well, then what happens? There's a French writer, Charles Forbrenet de Montalembert, who said of the French, remember, France used to be known as the eldest order of the church. He said, "We are the sons of the Crusaders, and we shall not recoil before the sons of Voltaire." In other words, the heirs and stewards of Christian revelation, who found that Christianity was worth living and dying for, shall not grow faint before the avatars of modernism and rationalism and materialism and reductionism. Well, how's that working out for us? It seems to me that we've lost confidence in what it means to be Christian. We've lost confidence in being heirs to the very best of the Christian West. We no longer see the world under the authority of Christ the King. We really don't have very much to say to anyone anymore. And so we're bored. We have to beguile our emptiness, and we also have to find a way to justify our existence and the different collections we take and the taxes we impose and the salaries we get. So we just join common cause with whatever the cool kids are doing at the moment. So if we're going to get hysterical about climate change and global warming, as those things are continuously redefined, and there's the great big meeting in Scotland, and all the great and the good show up in thousands of private jets, generating a carbon footprint greater than the city of Glasgow generates in a year. Canada sent over 200 delegates to this meeting. They didn't walk, and they didn't take sailboats. And Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, God bless the Canadians, he won't tell anyone how much it cost. So what we're being subjected to is a kind of theater where we're not allowed to boo at the stage, and we're not allowed to leave the theater and go out into the light, to go out into the realm of ordinary objects again. Especially when I was teaching freshmen at the beginning of an academic year in an introductory philosophy class, you'd have some 18-year-old sagaciously drawing upon all his education and life experience and say, "Well, you know, Father, out in the real world," not realizing I'd been doing this longer than he'd been alive. And I'd say, no, out there, that's the realm of common experience. That's the realm of illusion and propaganda and half-truths. That's Plato's cave. I said what we're doing here, drawing upon the best of reason and natural law and revelation, this is the real world. The true, the good, the beautiful, the virtuous, the liberating, and also really the obligatory. And these poor kids, God bless them, they were incapable of understanding what was being offered to them and what was being required of them. And that's tragic. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here in front of a microphone every day, is I think I need a megaphone now and not a podium, to let people know that we are being lied to, that the obvious is being censored. It's being censored for nefarious reasons. And we can see through the lies, and we can begin to push back against the darkness. We can join in common cause with people of goodwill, of good faith, and right reason, and insist on telling the truth that will set everyone free. It's a costly venture. I insist that it's worth it. God will be watching. Friends, when we come back, we're going to continue with Let's Talk About This. On this Friday, we'll be talking about the censorship of the obvious. You want to stay with us for the whole hour? Because in the last segment, it's you and me, Week in Readiness, reviewing the headlines of the week in light of the upcoming Sunday Scriptures, so you'll be all prayed up for Sunday Mass. Remember, our rallying cry here at the Catholic Current is Christus Mundo, Mundus Christo, bringing Christ to the world and the world to Christ. We do it because our Lord says so, for the greater glory of God, the love of our neighbor, and the salvation of our own soul. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Everything you need to keep the conversation going among your family and friends, we give to you. Together, let's take it around the world. We'll be right back. Please do stay with us.
You're listening to The Catholic Current with Father Robert McTeigue from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Stay connected with the show, our guests and topics, by following the show on Twitter and Gab. Just search for The Catholic Current.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTeigue of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. It's our special Friday format. We start with Let's Talk About This. We go through a complex issue together, and we end with Weekend Readiness, where we review the headlines of the week in light of the upcoming Sunday Scriptures. The topic today is this, censoring the obvious. We've talked about confusing children, about being a boy, being a girl. We've talked about confusing society, about what marriage is, what it means to be a man or a woman. We've also talked about some of the following the science, where the definition of vaccine, for example, continues to shift. Here's another example of what I think is a little bit of sleight of hand. You know, since the COVID interruption, there has been an obsession about the issue of masking. And religious people talk about it's a proof of love. It's a way of protecting yourself and others. And you can see a lot of things online, people getting ugly with not wearing masks and so on. But I want you to think back. Think back to the 80s when we started to understand that what HIV was, what AIDS was, people dying very horrible deaths with their immune system absolutely compromised. People who were absolutely defenseless against any germ at all. And then think of the late Princess Diana, who was praised for her not only talking about AIDS in public and visiting AIDS patients, but getting really close to them, touching them, really up close and personal. And you know what? She wasn't wearing a mask. Think about that. We talk about you have to wear a mask now because of the immunocompromised, et cetera, et cetera. You know, this is not for your benefit, it's for your neighbor's benefit. So here she is with full-blown AIDS patients who've got effectively no immune system at all, and she's in their personal space, and she's touching them and holding their hands, and she's not wearing a mask. In your spare time today, look for photographs of caregivers for AIDS patients, especially in the 80s, and see if you can find any of them gloving up and wearing masks. Think about that. Think about that. That is a bit of a head scratcher, it would seem to me. What's the purpose of censoring the obvious? Well, you want to impose the narrative. You want to keep control of the story, of course, and you want people to begin to despair of knowing the truth, of being able to discern truth from lies, and then eventually getting around to the idea that it doesn't matter what they think or believe. They just want to go along and get along and be left alone. I want to call to mind Alexander Solzhenitsyn. There's a famous quote that's attributed to him. He says this: "We know they are lying. They know they are lying. They know we know they are lying. We know they know we know they are lying. But they are still lying." So says Alexander Solzhenitsyn. There were some people who were sounding the alarm about the emergence of totalitarian regimes. Hannah Arendt, Václav Havel, and others, George Orwell, of course, Professor John B. Levy. And Hannah Arendt, in her book Origins of Totalitarianism, said that the work of propaganda was meant to bring about a mixture of gullibility and cynicism, she said, and that's prevalent in all ranks of totalitarian movements. The gullibility is we just believe whatever the new lie is, and yet somehow we know we're caught up in a culture of lies, so that we begin to doubt our ability to know the truth at all, to wonder whether or not truth was available to anyone at all. And so Jacob T. Levy, reflecting on people who were sounding the alarm about totalitarianism, again, Orwell and Václav Havel he says, they can help us recognize the kind of lie for what it is. Saying something obviously untrue and making your subordinates repeat it with a straight face and their own voice is a particularly startling display of power over them. It's something that is endemic to totalitarianism. Isn't that horrifying? How many times, obviously I can't ask for a show of hands, but how many times did you have to go into the post office or a store just to get something quick, just to get a book of stamps, just to get a bottle of aspirin? And even though your research convinced you that the whole masking thing was nonsense, you put it on anyway. Hey, Father, I got to fly to my daughter's wedding. I got to get on the plane. I'm going to put on the mask. I had someone say, Father, I wear a mask that's so loose that my beard and mustache protrude through. It doesn't capture anything, but it covers my mouth and my nose, and everybody just goes along. That's a terrible way to live. That's a humiliating way to live. And Hannah Arendt reflects on that. What happens when you're caught in a context where you know you're being bombarded by lies, and that even if you really wanted to find the truth, even if you were ready to pay a terrible price to find the truth, you begin to despair of finding it at all? You just can't discern truth from lies anymore. So let's go back to Hannah Arendt again. She says this: the result of a consistent and total substitution of lies for factual truth is not that the lie will now be accepted as truth and truth be defamed as a lie, but that the sense by which we take our bearings in the real world and the category of truth versus falsehood is among the mental means to this end is being destroyed. In other words, it's undercutting our confidence in the ability to know. And she points out later in her book on the origins of totalitarianism, Once you have people lose confidence in common sense, in the obvious, in memory, in history, in their senses, they're so much more easy to manipulate, to lie to lead by the nose. George Orwell saw this. We've always been at war with Eurasia. Eurasia has always been our friends. Masks aren't necessary. You can get close to someone with AIDS. Masks are proof of love. You need the mask. You don't need the mask. You need 2 masks. You need 1 mask. On and on it goes. So what frightens me is that we lose our confidence in the ability to discern the truth. Then we're going to be relieved of the obligation to know the truth and tell the truth. What shall we teach our children? What shall we say to people who do not know Christ? If we can't know saving, liberating, obliging truth, if by our senses we don't have access to what's real, to what's objective, to what's sure, if everything that we had taken for granted in the time of our grandparents and our parents and our growing up, man, woman, child, how children are conceived, marriage, Sunday obligation for Mass, if it all can be bleached out, redefined, taken away, hidden from sight, at whim, without warning, without explanation, then we're just staggering through a fog. There's nothing to strive for. There's nothing to live for. There's nothing to die for. There's nothing to fight for. Why bother doing anything? Why not just sit back with your cable connection and your universal basic income and your DoorDash? If you're living in California, you can have marijuana delivered to your front door. Why not just kick back and pass the time quietly? There's no point in leading a strenuous life. There's no point in acquiring virtue. There's no point in building community, starting a business or a family. Just give up. Friends, we're entering into a very, very dangerous stage of human history. It started with a nibbling at the truth, and now it's an aggressive gulping. And I wonder how much is going to be left. I try not to exaggerate. I try not to be alarmist, but I am profoundly, profoundly concerned. And again, quoting Jacob T. Levy, he says, being made to repeat an obvious lie makes it clear that you're powerless. When we look at what's taking place in social media, I'm really concerned about self-censorship. I know so many content providers say, well, I can't say that on YouTube because I'll be banned, so I'll say it on this much smaller platform. Or we'll use euphemisms for vaccines, for example, so you don't get banned or demonetized. I know in Britain there's some legislation making its way through Parliament that there's going to be speech codes enforced online, that if some authority decides that what you posted could conceivably cause undefined psychological harm to an undefined someone, then you can face jail time. You can be put in prison for making your thought crime public. So a lot of people are going to walk away from the public forum. They're not going to be whistleblowers. They're not going to be evangelists. They're not going to be teachers. They're going to drown in a stifling silence. That's not good. It's not good for human community. It's not good for democracy. It's certainly not good for the cause of the gospel. And while there's still time, we have to push back against those forces of darkness. we have to put ourselves between the innocent and the naive and those who would seduce them and addict them and say, no, you can't have them anymore. That's why we work so hard here at the Catholic Current and the Station of the Cross, because with you, we want to be part of the resistance, part of the defiance, part of the solution. Friends, we come back, we're going to continue with Let's Talk About This. We're talking about the censorship of the obvious, and we're going to start talking about some solutions. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Wherever you can find audio, you can find us. Subscribe on your favorite channel, write a 5-star review. We need to attract the attention of the algorithms so that these conversations get the attention they deserve. Everything you need to take this to your family and friends we give to you. Together, let's take it around the world. We really can do it with you. We certainly can't do it without you. We'll be right back. Stay with us. This is Jesuit Father Robert McTeigue, your daily host for the Catholic Current. Join me on Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern for Doubleheader. We'll be talking about politics in the service of life. We'll start with Dr. Peter Navarro and his new book giving an insider's account of the nation's capital as COVID erupted. Then we'll meet up with Terry Schilling of the American Principles Project to review pro-life victories in the recent elections. Hear it all on the Catholic Current on Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern, coming to you from the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
This is the Catholic Current from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Catch up on an episode you've missed or share them with your family or friends. The Catholic Current is podcasted wherever you enjoy listening. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTeigue of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with charity and clarity. We're in the midst of our special Friday format. We start with Let's Talk About This. You and I make our way through a complex issue together. In the last segment, it's you and me again with weekend readiness, reviewing the headlines of the week in light of the upcoming Sunday Scriptures, so you'll be all prayed up for Sunday Mass. The topic we're dealing with today, and let's talk about this, is the censorship of the obvious. The powers and principalities of this world want us to forget our past. They want us to distrust our senses and common sense, and they want us complicit in what we know to be not true, so that we lose our ability to discern between falsehood and truth, and eventually numb our desire and capacity for truth, so that we can be led passively and listlessly into a future of someone else's choosing. And we mentioned in the last segment that being forced to repeat, as it said, in your own voice, things that you don't believe is a reminder that you're powerless. But are we powerless? Well, remember, our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. Let's go back to Alexander Solzhenitsyn again, the great Russian writer. I think in some ways he was a mystic. I mean, he was really on the receiving end of some of the most brutal aspect of totalitarianism in the 20th century. And he talks about truth and lies. And he says that the simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. He said one word of truth outweighs the world. And that's why they're so aggressive about censorship, why people have to be canceled, driven out of polite society, banished from social media. Solzhenitsyn goes on to say, you can resolve to live your life with integrity. Let your credo be this: let the lie come into the world. Let it even triumph, but not through me. So says Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And of course, one of the greatest lies of all is that we can live without God, that we don't need grace, we don't need the transcendent, that the only task worth our time is to rearrange material goods according to our will to stimulate greater and greater pleasure and to more and more avoid any kind of discomfort, whether it's physical pain or even the discomfort of hearing words of ideas that may upset us. I would say that if we want to move from our difficult present into a future worth having, we have to find a way of reclaiming our past. Talk about this a little bit. One of my favorite authors is Josef Pieper, Pieper. He has a genius for stuffing 500 pages of wisdom into a mere 100 pages with absolute lucidity. Now, he wrote originally in German. I never studied that much German to be able to read him in the original, but I talked to some native speakers, and I would say, did Pieper just get good translators, or was he that clear even in the original German? And they said, oh, Father, he's crystal clear in the original German. That's really hard to do if you studied any German. But he says this. Josef Pieper says, the vital necessity for tradition consists in the fact, as the old aphorism goes, that mankind has greater need of being reminded than of being instructed. Human existence can come to grief not only because people neglect further learning, but also because people forget and lose something indispensable. So says Josef Pieper. And friends, I think we've been losing indispensable things for a long time. We've forgotten about what health is, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what is family, what is marriage, how children are to be begotten and raised, how the Christ of God is to be worshipped worthily, what actually made ordinary people into very great saints and sages and mystics and scholars, what moved the poor and the wealthy alike to turn their lives upside down, to build great cathedrals that would not be finished before they died. Don't you want to know? Don't you want to know how people got that way? I remember back in the 80s seeing that opening scene of the movie, The Mission, about the Jesuit missionary work in Paraguay and Uruguay. And there was a Jesuit missionary who gets killed by indigenous people. He's lashed to a cross and put over a waterfall. In the next scene, there's a Jesuit priest climbing up the waterfall to go replace him. And I remember thinking to myself, what kind of homilies did he hear? What were his retreats like? What were his classes like? What was his individual experience of Mass like? Which catechism did he read? What art did he look at? What music did he hear? What kind of friendships did he have? That all of that combined together, that when one of his brothers was sent sailing off of a waterfall tied to a cross, he said, now it's my turn. And he rolled up his sleeves and got to climbing. Wouldn't you want to know? I think of my Jesuit brother, Father Isaac Jogues, ministering to indigenous peoples in North America, brutally tortured, had some of his fingers gnarled off, escaped, got back to France, and decided to go back, knowing that he would be brutally killed. But there were souls there. There were people he baptized, and he wanted to make sure they had the sacraments. And he knew that the people likely to kill him even more certainly needed the gospel. Don't you want to know what inspired him? Wouldn't you want to be part of a community that would move you and prepare you to say, I want to go back to the danger and face certain horrible death because there's a greater good that I can serve? Wouldn't you want to know how and why some people were certain they had a good reason to live and a good reason to die? People who were never bored. Can you imagine living like that every day? People used to live that way, at least some of them. I want to find out how they did that. And that involves going back into history and the arts and tradition, and especially Christian wisdom. Christian wisdom that formed great saints. even so long ago as prior to 1965. I want to know more about that. I think you should know more about that too. I'm also aware of the fact that what I'm talking about, standing against the darkness, pushing back against the darkness, insisting on truth in the presence of falsehood, discerning the true from the false, learning how to resist propaganda, learning how to teach people the truth. That is not the work of isolated individuals. That's not something that any one person can do on his own. And so I want to talk about the importance of Christian fellowship and Christian community, especially in times of growing darkness, times like our own, to be candid. I think back to when I first left graduate school and I was living in Washington, D.C. in the mid-1980s and was lost in a lot of ways. And a group of friends and I would get together, and on Thursday nights we would meet at a friend's apartment and we would pray over the upcoming Sunday scriptures. And then we would go to Mass together on Sunday, and after Mass we'd go out for coffee and bagels and talk about the homily. We were very fortunate to be at a parish where there was a homily worth talking about every Sunday. Can you imagine? Who could live like that? And we talk about what God was doing in our lives. So we had a very great sense of Sabbath. And we had a sense that our time and our energy was fed from and oriented towards Sunday, the holy sacrifice of the Mass. We need to start doing that again. I think that some people go to the same parish the way that some people shop at the same 7-Eleven. We're in the same place at the same time merely by coincidence. We're just there when the store hours allow us to come in through the door. We're at Mass at this time rather than that because that's when Mass is. But what if we had a sense that worship was something that we did together? And what if we had a sense that preparing for worship was something that we did together? It's the first Friday of the month. Catholic tradition says this is a day to be dedicated to devotion to the Sacred Heart. Tomorrow is the first Saturday of the month. Our Lady at Fatima was very clear about praying the first Saturdays together, the 5 first Saturdays. And that was essential for protecting ourselves and steeling ourselves against the wickedness that is surrounding us. And it would allow us to share in her victory. It would allow us to share in the triumph of her Immaculate Heart. What if we made a firm commitment with friends in the Lord to worship together on First Fridays and First Saturdays? What if we resolved to get together for dinner once a week and talk about the upcoming Sunday scriptures? What if we made a commitment to pray the rosary together, to exchange books, to listen to good Catholic music together? What if we read a book together and talked about it? Not by Zoom, but in person. What if we fostered communities where we realized we really are in this together? We need each other. See, one of the tricks and lies and deceits of tyranny, of propaganda, of totalitarianism is to say, you're the only one. You're the only one who thinks like this. You're the oddball. You're the crazy one. No one thinks like you. No one feels like you. No one believes what you believe. No one prioritizes as you prioritize. No one wants to love the way that you want to love. You're on your own. You have no relation to past, present, or future. Anyone who hears your word and knows your heart will not recognize anything in you. Isolation and despair feed upon each other and they breed each other. And what we need are small circles of Christians, small circles of faithful Catholic disciples who don't have to reinvent the wheel or think of something to do, but to go back to the well, go back to the sacred well of Catholic tradition, of wisdom and graces and experience that made great art and great saints, that inspired people to carry the gospel to the ends of the earth and to the end of time. Such a people so steeped in grace, so steeped in perennial wisdom, so committed to being conformed to Christ, crucified, risen, reigning, and returning. Such a people could not be overcome by any state, by any emperor, by any tyranny, by any threat. My friends, we could be such a people. We could be the people of the light, marked by the wounds of Christ, united with him in his suffering and in his victory. And we could put ourselves between the powers and principalities of this world and the lost sheep about to be devoured and say, you can't have them anymore. And we fight not in our own strength, but in the strength of Christ our King, who has already won the victory. Friends, think on these things. Think on these things this weekend. Talk about this with your family and friends. Bring it to prayer. I'm Jesuit Father Robert McTeigue. You want to stay with us for the rest of the hour? In the next segment, it is you and me again with Weekend Readiness. We'll be reflecting on the headlines of the week in light of the upcoming Sunday Scriptures, so you'll be all prayed up for Sunday Mass. Be part of the conversation. Follow what we're following by following us on Gab. That's gab.com. The channel is The Catholic Current. Take this conversation to your family and friends, and together we'll take it around the world. Let's get busy. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Please do stay with us.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by the stationofthecross.com, a listener-funded nonprofit organization. Please prayerfully consider donating at thestationofthecross.com by calling 1-877-888-6279 or through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app.